Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. We're going to talk about, don't know the name of this, Yes, I'm going to call it, because I know it's called Yes, and then there's like a little title thing. It's about WrestleMania, I suppose. The Daniel Bryan book. It's his only book as far as I know. It's definitely his first book, but as far as I know, it's his only book so far. Which just sort of like chronicles his road to the WrestleMania 30 main event. I got this as an audiobook through Audible. I'd got a few credits, didn't know what to use it on. I listened to some wrestling podcasts. I'm a huge wrestling fan, as it is, and thought, let's give this a go. This could be quite an interesting book. It's a career I've not really followed too much outside of the WWE. I have a couple of DVDs. In fact, I was watching one after I finished reading this book. I've got his best of Ring of Honor matches DVD. So I watched a couple of those matches after this because he mentions a few of them in there, and I thought, I'm going to watch that match and see what I think of it. After he mentions it. I've always thought he's a really good wrestler, and he's got a really unique style in a way. We find out in this book where it comes from. The book, the way it's written, I'm assuming is the same way it's read, obviously. But the way it's written and the way it's read are the same. So there's someone from WWE, I want to say his name's Craig Tello, who helped write this book. And he writes it all from the WrestleMania week perspective following Daniel Bryan. And he just goes into the behind the scenes stuff and the bits that we do see, the bits that we don't see, that all happen in WrestleMania week leading up to his main event win. Spoiler alert if you didn't already know that. Then Daniel Bryan, so half the chapter will be read by him, telling you what's happening during WrestleMania week, and it's all broken down for you as it happens, like the Hall of Fame, the actual match, behind the scenes stuff, everything that's happening, because they're also planning a wedding. All of that goes into what Craig Tello is talking about. Then it cuts, and Daniel Bryan starts speaking to you, and every time Daniel Bryan speaks to you, it's about his own career, and I like that twist, that little aspect to it, that it's not just a book written by a WWE man that's telling you exactly what happened to Daniel Bryan and the best recollection of what he can remember of what happened to Daniel Bryan, and then everything he's asked him about, and it's just like, these are my set questions that I asked him, and you're not going to get anything else from me. It's more this is what I saw when I was following him, and then Daniel Bryan's like, so this is how I got to this point in my career. And I found that really interesting. He goes into how his style changed in the ring, what changed, how it changed, his injuries in the past, which I'd heard about, and then he goes into more details and he mentions them more, and you just start thinking, oh no, I can't believe this. They used to do tournaments on the independent circuit, and he injured himself before one of them, and he goes into detail about how he'd injured himself here, but he just carried on anyway because that's the way he wrestled and that's the style and that's just what you did on the independents, and it's crazy to hear. It's the first. I want to say it's the first. It's probably not. This is the first wrestling autobiography I've read. I've got a couple more. I've got the Chris Jericho one. I've got the first Chris Jericho book that I really want to read. This has sort of got me prepared to read that, and I can't wait to read it now. There's a few more out there that I do want to read, and this has really helped me want to get to that point now of actually reading them. But this being the first one, and it being so almost independent heavy. Really breaking down what happens on the independents really opens your eyes a little bit more, and it's really interesting to hear about. And then hearing all the stuff that happened behind the scenes during his run in WWE, and he's not shy about some of the stuff that happened. And it's not just him that he mentions, it's every other wrestler that he sort of interacts with and how it all breaks down and things. So it's a really interesting read, actually. I listen to it, but it's an interesting read. It's a really good book. I really enjoyed this book. I believe it's 8 hours, between 5 and 8 hours. I'm listening to another book now that's about 8 hours. So I think that one was about between 5 and 8 hours. And I powered through it. I couldn't have listened to it in less than a week. It's got to have been less than a week that I listened to it in, because every time I went out the house, instead of putting music on, I wanted to listen to what happened next in this book. But yeah, it's a really interesting read. If you're a wrestling fan, I'd highly recommend this book. It's a really, really interesting book. If you're not a wrestling fan, or you want to read a different autobiography, the one I'll definitely mention right now is Tina Fey's Bossy Pants. Very good book, and she reads it herself on Audible. I'm not sponsored by Audible, by the way. It's just that's why I listened to it on. I watched different YouTubers that were sponsored, so I got my link through that, and now I'm listening to all these books. But that's a really good book, and this wasn't different genre. She's talking about how to get into the business of being a comedian. He's talking about how he got into the wrestling business and how he got so far into it, and the fact that like he's not the most confident of people, to have got where he is in life is really interesting to read, and how basically he didn't push himself, the fans pushed him, and it's really cool to hear. So yeah, it sort of just chronicles his journey from like where he started to where he is now. It goes into all of his backstory, so it goes into everything like from his training days to Ring of Honor to Japan to WWE. If that sounds interesting to you, which I'm not saying it didn't sound interesting to me, but it wasn't high up on my list to read. And then I read it and I was like, I'm so glad I read this. This is really interesting stuff. I'd definitely give it a recommendation. I hope you enjoyed this video. These talkabouts are terrible. I always feel like it doesn't flow, but I don't care. That's pretty much everything I've got to say about this book. I'd really recommend it. If you think that sounds interesting, give it a listen. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you again in the next one.